Hello and welcome to Indian Americans of Irvine and Orange County IAIOC operating under the name Indian Americans on Clubhouse. My name is Anjali Kasharkar and I am the Media Outreach Liaison for the IAIOC. The following podcast is based on a discussion with Ms. Neha Sehgal and Mr. Jonathan Evans, authors of the study Religion in India, Tolerance and Segregation. This study is Pew Research Center's most comprehensive, in-depth exploration of India to date and is based on face-to-face interview of approximately 30,000 respondents. This discussion was moderated by Dr. Praveen Sinha, founder of the Indian American Club on Clubhouse and Indian Americans of Irvine and Orange County in Southern California. Discussion was co-moderated by Mr. Tushar Gupta of Swarajya magazine in India and Ms. Manjiri Patwardhan, a data scientist based in New Jersey, USA. The event took place on Clubhouse on Monday, 26th of July, 2021 at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please enjoy the podcast and provide your feedback at ia.irvine.oc@gmail.com. Also, please like the page and follow us on Facebook using the link provided below in the description. Thank you.
This morning, and we'll walk through in brief some of the findings from the study, and as was mentioned, it is a fairly lengthy study, so I encourage you to go read it in full as you have time, but just some highlights this morning. And first, wanted to also give just a brief background on what the Pew Research Center is. So we are a nonprofit, non-partisan, non-advocacy research organization. And the Pew Research Center studies lots of things, but the team I am specifically on, and Neha is specifically on, we study religion around the world. And we previously have surveyed in other parts of the world, Latin America, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Africa, the Middle East. And we don't promote religion or study, just one religion. We're trying to seek how religion in general influences people's lives, because time and again we see that it does play a meaningful role in people's lives and therefore in their societies and even in the broader world. And our primary funding source is the Pew Charitable Trust, but for large projects like this we also receive additional funding at times, and for this study we received some funding from the John Templeton Foundation, and they have long supported the Pew Research Center's efforts to study religious change and how it influences the world. And we are, like I said, a non-profit organization, and we don't have clients or advertisers. No one can commission a Pew Research Center survey or a study. We make all of our research freely available. So the report is on our website, pewresearch.org, and within the next few months, the data set will be made available so that other researchers can do their own publications and research on it, because we want this knowledge to be available to everyone as much as possible. But specifically jumping into the study on India, why you're all here today. So we conducted interviews with nearly 30,000 Indian adults all across the country. It took several months to do. We started towards the end of 2019, and it went until the early months of 2020. We had to shut down just a little earlier than expected due to the first wave of COVID-19 happening. So we didn't make it to Sikkim or Manipur, but we made it to the other states across the country, several of the Union territories, including the capital. We weren't able to go into the Kashmir Valley, but we did make it into Jammu. And even with those few exclusions, our survey is representative of 98% of the Indian population, and we interviewed in 17 languages so that people, as many as possible, could take it in their, hopefully their mother tongue. And the interviews lasted about 45 minutes or so. So again, we aren't able to cover everything, but just some highlights this morning. And of course, during the question and answer period, though, we're happy to answer questions on things that we aren't necessarily going to talk about in the next few minutes, though. And also wanted to say we not only interviewed Hindus and Muslims, who make up 90+% between the two groups of the country, we also, the way we designed the survey, we were able to interview Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains, and we're able to talk about their attitudes and practices and beliefs as well. And one of the big findings we found is that Indians overwhelmingly see religious tolerance as a core value. At the same time, this connects to a strong desire for religious segregation. And so with this overlap, it suggests to us a concept of pluralism that's more like, say, a patchwork quilt or a tali than a melting pot or perhaps a salad bowl. And this has been characterized by a previous author as living together separately. And the data seems to support this idea of this concept of pluralism. And we also find that the desire for religious segregation influences and interacts with some fault lines in Indian identity and politics that you see frequently discussed in the media or on social media. And so these are the three buckets that we wanted to talk about with all of you today. Broadly, the commitment to tolerance, the desire for religious segregation, and how this interacts with some fault lines in Indian society. So first, looking at tolerance and shared values. So broadly, Indians say that they are very free to practice their own religion, and this isn't just true, say, of Hindus or Muslims. This is true of even the smaller groups such as Buddhists or Jains, that among the general population, 91% of Indians say they are very free to practice their religion. And even, say, among Buddhists, 93% say that they are very free to practice their religion. And that people tend to say this about other religions too. They say people from other religions are very free to practice their religion. And this is seen as this free practice of religion, respecting other religions, is seen as a core part of people's identity, both Indian identity and their religious identity. So we see that 84% of Indians say that respecting all religions is very important to being truly Indian. And then large majorities in all the religious groups also say that respecting other religions is a very important part of their own religious identity. So, for example, Hindus said that respecting other religions is a very important part of being a Hindu. Same for Muslims about being a Muslim. This is broadly seen as an important part of who Indians are, both as a nation and in their own religious groups. And there is some sharing of religious beliefs and practices. So karma, 77% of Hindus say that they believe in karma, and 77% of Muslims say the same, say that they believe in karma, even though perhaps karma is not discussed in the Quran. There is this shared belief. And then another question we asked if people believe that the Ganges has the power to purify. And 81% of Hindus say this, and this is very much based in Hindu traditions, but also 32%, a third of Christians also say that they believe that the Ganges has the power to purify, even though the Ganges is not mentioned in the Bible or in our other holy texts in Christianity. And so even though there is this shared belief in certain teachings and practices, and that there's this broad respect for other religions and saying it's an important part, religious groups in general see themselves as very different from each other in India. So among the Hindu community in India, we asked if they feel that they have a lot in common with or are very different from, and then we listed out different religious groups, and we did the same for other communities. Among the Hindu community, 2/3 say that they are very different from India's Muslims. And among the Muslim community, the same share, we see 64% saying that they are very different from India's Hindus. And in general, we see this among other religious communities as well, that there's a general sense that we as a religious community are very different from the other religious communities in India. Sikhs and Jains do, however, tend to say they have a lot in common with India's Hindus. But overall, the perception is whether or not religiously or doctrinally scholars might say that these communities are similar, the people on the ground generally see themselves as very different from each other. And now I'll pass it over to Neha to talk about religious segregation.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you, everybody, for hosting this group. We also find that in addition to this general perception of difference among India's religious communities, people live their lives in a highly religiously segregated way. And one way in which this plays out is how people feel about interreligious marriage. Generally, most Indians feel that it is very important to stop both women and men in their community from marrying outside their religion. And this is true, say, of about 2/3 of Hindus who say it's important to stop Hindu women as well as Hindu men from marrying outside their religion. But actually, this sentiment is even more widespread among Muslims, who also say that it is important to stop interreligious marriage. And it's not just about marriage and what kind of marriage people think is appropriate. We also find that generally India's religious communities tend to keep their friendship circles confined to their own religious group. They tell us that either all of their friends share their religion or most of their friends share their religion. And that's true not just of the majority Hindu community, but it's also true of the smaller groups, for example, Buddhists or Jains, who just form a sliver of the population. They too tend to confine their friendship circles to their own religious group. When it comes to people's neighborhoods and what kind of neighborhood they prefer to live in, generally we find that people are accepting of others in their neighborhood. Still, there are significant minorities among each religious group who would rather keep certain other people out of their neighborhoods. So, for example, among Hindus, we find 36% saying that they would not be willing to accept a Muslim as a neighbor, and 31% saying they would not be willing to accept a Christian as a neighbor. And similarly, say among Muslims, roughly a quarter or so wouldn't want a Christian, Sikh, Buddhist, or Jain as a neighbor. And this is also true among other religious communities where significant minorities, by no means a majority, but for a significant share of people, they'd rather live in a religiously segregated neighborhood. The feeling is also particularly resonant among Jains, a majority of whom would rather keep a Muslim out of their neighborhood. So you get the sense of a country that expresses a lot of commitment to the principles of tolerance, but also prefers where people prefer to live religiously segregated lives. And this religious segregation is tied up with some fault lines we see in India today about questions of national identity as well as politics. So for India's Hindu community, for example, a majority of Hindus say that it is very important to be Hindu to be truly Indian. So they closely tie religion with national identity. And closely related is the importance of the language Hindi to national identity. We also find that a majority of Hindus say that speaking Hindi is very important to being truly Indian. And about half of Hindus take both positions. They say being a Hindu is very important. They also say speaking Hindi is very important. So both religion and language are important to national identity. And these positions, these attitudes toward national identity are highly political. So if you take a look at BJP's vote share in the 2019 parliamentary election, BJP earned the majority of its vote, or among people who link religion with national identity, a majority of them say they voted for the BJP, right? But BJP's vote share falls significantly among Hindus who don't connect religion as closely with national identity. And the same thing's true for language. BJP's vote share is much higher among Hindus who connect religion as well as language with national identity. So altogether, we find that among Hindus in India today, politics, religion, as well as language, all three elements are closely intertwined. And we try to measure in this survey what share of Hindus take all three positions. They say they voted for the BJP, they say being a Hindu is very important to national identity, and they say speaking Hindi is very important to national identity. How many Hindus fall into all three? And we find that share to be about 30% of Hindus who take all three positions. And this 30% expresses attitudes that are very different from other Hindus. And that's true for a variety of issues. The regional distribution is quite different. They're much more concentrated in the north and central parts of the country, say, than in the south. They tend to be more religiously observant. But one way in which they show a consistent pattern of difference from other Hindus is how they feel about religious segregation. We find that this group, those who voted for the BJP and link religion as well as language with national identity, they tend to live a much more religiously segregated life. They're more likely to say they wouldn't want a neighbor who is of another religion. A majority of them say all of their close friends are Hindu, and the sentiment that it is very important to stop interreligious marriage is heightened among this group. So this is where we come back to the story of religious segregation in India being tied up with some of the political and national fault lines that are discussed quite a bit in Indian media and Indian public discourse. But in addition to attitudes toward politics and segregation and tolerance, this study also takes a deep dive into the religious elements of Hindu identity and what it means to be Hindu and what beliefs are important. So we've taken a look at how Hindus conceive of God, and whether they believe in God, and whether other religious groups believe in God, and how are Hindu attitudes toward God unique. Generally, we find that most Indians believe in God. That includes a majority of Hindus as well as Muslims, and most people say that they're absolutely certain about their belief in God. But what kind of God do Hindus believe in? So we also asked if they believe in one God, or one God with many manifestations, or many gods. And we find that the majority of Hindus believe in one God with many manifestations, while very few Hindus, actually just 7%, say that there are many gods. Some Hindus, and so about 30%, say that there's only one God. And of course, the position that there's only one God is much more common among Muslims and Christians. But it's noteworthy that even among Muslims and Christians, roughly 1 in 5, or approaching a quarter, do share this Hindu belief that there is one God with many manifestations. And that's part of a trend with certain beliefs being shared among India's religious communities, even though they may be theologically outside of sort of religious boundaries. And of course, this concept of many gods is quite interesting, and what does it really mean? So we also probe deeper into which God Hindus feel closest to. And the way we did this is we offered each respondent a card that had images of about 16 different gods and goddesses. And we asked them to pick 3 that they feel closest to. And the Hindu god that seemed most popular throughout the country is Shiva. About 44% of Hindus picked Shiva as the god that they feel closest to. Hanuman came in at second, just behind Shiva, and then followed by Ganesh. So we found that these are the kind of the 3 gods that were most likely to be picked by response, with Shiva being the most popular. But while Hindus overall in India express belief in God, they're easily able to answer questions about what kind of God they believe in. We also found that belief in God is not really central to Hindu identity in India. So we asked people, can a person be a Hindu if they don't believe in God, or if they don't perform prayers, or don't go to temple? We asked a whole series of items like this. And Hindu public opinion is divided. To about 50% of Hindus, a person who doesn't believe in God can still be a Hindu, but to the other 50%, that's fine, and you don't have to believe in God to be a Hindu, or at least that's not disqualifying. And we found the same trend when it comes to praying or going to temple. Hindu public opinion is divided. Half of people say you can be a Hindu if you don't do these things, but to the other half, these are not disqualifying conditions. The one thing where a majority of Hindus seem to agree that doing this is disqualifying to be a Hindu is eating beef. 72% of Hindus said that a person who eats beef cannot be a Hindu. And similarly, a majority also said that celebrating Eid or not celebrating Hindu festivals is disqualifying to Hindu identity. So you get the sense of diet as well as these practices of religious celebrations, etc., being quite central to Hindu identity, perhaps even more so than some of the religious practice elements per se. So those were just some of the key highlights. I'll stop there to avoid overwhelming you with findings. But as Jonathan said, there's a lot more in this study, including attitudes on caste, religious conversion, regional differences among Hindus. For all of this, as well as the rest of the study, I'd encourage you to go to pewresearch.org/India survey. Report's over 200 pages long. Dr. Sinha said he read the whole thing, and my hat's off to him for being able to do that. For the rest of you, if you're having any trouble sleeping at night, I highly recommend this as a sleep aid.
Reading is one thing, comprehending and making sense out of it is very different, as you may have noticed. I read everything, but there's a lot to absorb, to put it mildly. Anything, Anna, would you like to add to this?
No, I think, thank you so much, Jonathan and Neha really summed it up, and we're happy to answer questions if there are any.
Okay, so in the questioning, I'll be joined by Tushar and Manjari, who have done some homework on this as well. I'll start with one question, and I have a theory for it, but I'll let you answer that. What is your take on it? And the very first question that you started, Indians nearly universally say they are very free to practice their religion. But if you look at the second question, which talks about are other people free, the answer is at least 10 percentage points smaller. So I am fine, but I think others are not fine. What do you make out of that? I mean, they're not so fine, relatively speaking. Can we say these differences are significant? Any way we can measure this, or it's simply hard to decipher?
Let me begin with an answer, then perhaps Jonathan can pipe in as well. I mean, I think part of what we have to remember is the majority of people felt that they are very free to practice their religion, and the majority of people felt that others are free to practice their religion. And even though there is maybe a 5 to 10 point difference, as you're pointing out, and it meets the standards for statistical significance. Good thing that I can pronounce statistics, given that I'm a survey researcher. It's still substantively not that much, given that the story is the same. And it's part of it is people are guessing, right? We're giving them, they don't know about others, or they may know about others, but it's not a given. And we're just giving them an opportunity to say, just what's your impression? And they may be basing their impression on many factors, including not just their personal experiences, which we know may be limited because of the high levels of religious segregation in India, but they may be basing it on so many other things, like what they read in the news, what they watch on the news media, what they find on social media, and so on. So these things could all be shaping how they respond regarding others. Jonathan, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and one other thing, so while the very free measure, there's perhaps roughly a 10-point difference, that shrinks because we asked people, we gave them 4 answer options. You could say very free, somewhat free, not too free, or not at all free. And when we combine very free and somewhat free, the difference between how free you are and how free you see other people, it shrinks to closer to 5 percentage points. So there still is a difference, but it's much smaller when we combine basically everyone who says that people are free. Nationally, 98% of Indians say that they are free. That's both very free and somewhat free. And then 93% say that people in other religions are free. So again, 90% plus saying that they and others are free to practice religion.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. And the reason I asked is because based on what I read in the media, this survey was shocking to me because it confirmed my beliefs about how India was when I left a long time back. But the news that I was reading in the media always portrayed a picture that was very, I would say, lack of a better word, negative. And this survey basically pointed that out. And this question sort of echoed my sentiment in that regard also. So thanks for clarifying that. Tushar, if you have any question on this tolerance part,
yes, I would like to build upon that. Thank you. Insights you gave. And I must say it's a very elaborate study and it takes a while for one to get around it. But on the question of tolerance, again, there's something that your survey captures that our literature, entertainment industry has failed to capture, which is that how different communities view interreligious marriage. And believe it or not, it's a very hotly debated topic in India. Now, the popular narrative that is given or thrown around is that Hindus are the one who are very much against interreligious marriage and say that it should be stopped on all fronts and all those things. But your survey captures that 76% of the Indian adults, men from the Muslim community are against interreligious marriage. As much as 80% of the Muslim women are against interreligious marriage, as compared to 65-7% women. And the numbers are far low for Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists. Factors were you looking at?
Sorry, Tushar, you, I don't know if it was just me, but you cut out and then came back in. Jonathan, did you catch the whole question?
Tushar, you may just like to repeat the question part, the last.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, Neha, your survey captures something the popular narrative in India ignores.
So I got all that, Tushar. Just the last part, like you were asking.
The last is that the Christian Sikhs, they are very tolerant to interreligious marriage.
Okay. So you asked like why that might be. I think let me just clarify a couple of things. Yeah, I understood the question.
What were the factors that help you derive that Muslims are very much against interreligious? Elaborate on that, please.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me clarify a couple aspects of the data before answering your question. And it's like you said, it's a elaborate study, and there's so many statistics, and which way to look at it can get very confusing very quickly. So we ask this question about whether people think it is important, if at all, to stop interreligious marriage. And we asked her both, is it important to stop women in our community from marrying into other religions? And we also asked about men separately, just because there may be a gender element to this, right? And at least that's in the popular discourse. So among Hindus, we find that 2/3 say that it is very important to stop Hindu women as well as Hindu men from marrying into other religious communities, right? So that's not Hindu women, but these are not the opinions of Hindu women. These are the opinions of overall Hindus towards stopping Hindu women from marrying others. Among Muslims, you're absolutely right. Even higher share, roughly 80%, said that it is important to stop the interreligious marriage of Muslim women as well as Muslim men. And you're right that the shares are lower among Christians, and the shares are lower among Buddhists, and somewhat lower among Sikhs and Jains, even though it's still a majority among those groups. So I can't really give you a sense for like why and what Christians were thinking about, because that would require me to speculate way too much. But what I can say is what we see among Christians is part of a broader trend. Generally, we feel that Christians, even when it comes to their neighborhoods as well as their friends, they are more likely to sort of have more permeable boundaries in the patchwork quilt. They are less likely to say they wouldn't want a neighbor of another religion, etc. So this is kind of part of a trend among Christians and also among Buddhists, that we see that they live less religiously segregated lives compared with some of India's other religious groups. With regard to interreligious marriage, I'll also add that we asked people what the religion of their spouse is, and we also asked in what religion was the spouse raised. Any way you look at it, interreligious marriage is a rare occurrence in India. Even if you ask people who are currently married to a spouse of a different religion, or if their spouse had maybe converted, either way you look at it, the vast majority of it, like 98%, are married to people of their same religion. Combined with that, there's widespread opposition to interreligious marriage in the sense that interreligious marriage must be stopped. So that's the data we have on that. Jonathan, feel free to add anything you think I missed.
I think that, generally covers it. Looking at the answer options for these questions as well, this was, again, they had 4 answer options. And while, a minority of Christians and Buddhists said that it was very important to stop people from marrying into another religion, it does switch to being a majority, still less, but a majority of people in those communities who said very important or somewhat important. So taking the top half of the scale. So there is still widespread support. It is just not at the same level, perhaps, as among Hindus and Muslims.
Tushar, any follow-up question, or we can move to the next part?
I think Manjari can ask one question and I can come back with another one. I have one more, but I'll come back to it a bit later.
Thanks, Tushar. I had a question about the preference for segregated living section that you had in the survey. Do you have Do you have any information on why they would prefer to live in segregated neighborhoods versus not? Were there any follow-up questions to that? I have some theories about it, but I wanted to know if there was any information you collected while doing the surveys.
From a data perspective, it's very difficult to ask respondents why, because we typically avoid doing it because they have a lot of difficulty articulating exactly why they want to live the way that they want to live. I mean, the data is quite clear. People express a preference for religious tolerance, but their concept of religious tolerance means living in segregated communities. So, but we don't call ourselves India experts or Indian historians of India or anthropologists of India. And I think someone like you, Manjari, would be in a much better position to offer theories as to why that might be the case. So I'm very interested to hear from you as to what you think the reasons might be.
Can I add something here before you go, Manjari?
Yes.
Whenever we're asking questions, we're just trying to see if you had any data, some question that may further reflect on that.
Understood.
No need to speculate.
Understood. Right.
I think the one thing which I do want to talk about segregation is that segregation in the USA has a very, very different meaning than segregation in India. For example, in the USA, it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of any factor when you have a housing issue like renters and all that. Probably Neha and Jonathan and Anna, you're fully aware of that. In India, actually, on the contrary, there was a Supreme Court case in which a Parsi community, which lives in a very segregated fashion, that case went to the Supreme Court and they prevailed. They said they have the right to live separately, and the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. So I think India has a slightly different context because when we see lack of segregation in the US, we sort of see it as racism or have a negative connotation, whereas in the Indian Supreme Court, it was ruled as a sort of like a preserving somebody's identity and giving them the right to live together if they choose to do so. I think I'm forgetting the year, but it was a court case that was went to Supreme Court, and the judge and the famous lawyer was Raj Jethmalani. Sarshari might know, he recently passed away. He was a very famous lawyer. So I just wanted to put the context here that segregation in India has a very, very, means it has been ruled legal in India, but it is totally illegal in the US. So Manjari, go ahead.
No, I completely agree with you. I was wondering if there were any questions around, dietary preferences and other factors that may have led to that. But since we don't have data, I would also not speculate on what that was, and perhaps further research might help illuminate that.
That's actually a good point. I'm glad you brought up diet. I mean, we do find dietary preferences being a very important part of people's religious identity. So, among Hindus, I already mentioned this in the opening remarks, that the importance of beef and avoiding beef is really central to Hindu identity. Similarly, among Muslims, avoiding pork was even more central than, say, believing in God, which was a very, very counterintuitive result. But it sort of gave the sense of how important diet is to Indian religious life, regardless of religion. And that could be tied in. I mean, we did find that attitudes on beef are closely tied up with segregation. So, I do think your hypothesis does have validity, Manjari, on this.
Tushar, you want to ask a follow-up question?
Yes. Am I clear? Am I audible, I hope?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, on page 64 of the report, there's a very important aspect discussed, that what are the major concerns of the population, of the general population. And there's one figure that catches my eye because I come from Chandigarh, which is the capital state of Punjab in Haryana, and Punjab is where majority of the Sikhs are. And it's important for the information of the room that the survey was conducted before any of these farmer protests happened. This was conducted in the end of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. I could give you the exact date. Between November 17, 2019 to March 23, 2020. This is part of the survey we are discussing. So, to the authors, I have a question. there's this important, I could make sense why Sikhs consider unemployment, 93% of them, higher than any other community, to be a very big problem, because Punjab has that problem. Corruption, again, I can understand why it's 85%, second highest. But what I am not unable to understand is why communal violence is seen as a very big problem by Sikhs in India compared to Hindu, Muslims, Christians. Was there any reasoning behind it? Because in Punjab, there is not a lot of history, barring the partition, of communal violence between Hindus and Sikhs. Of course, it's a very, very wonderful social setup. So why do you think 78% of the Sikhs you surveyed thought that communal violence is a very big problem in India, compared to 65% Hindus and 65% Muslims? That's one question I have.
No, I think that's a really interesting question. Let me attempt to give you an answer that's based in the data, and Jonathan, feel free to add anything you like. The history of Sikhs in India does have elements of communal violence really hitting that community quite closely. So we have to keep that in mind. And in this study, we did ask about the partition. So, we asked people if they think, 70 some years later, we're asking a historical question, and we asked people if they think the partition of India and Pakistan was a good thing or a bad thing for Hindu-Muslim relations. And Sikhs were the one community where a majority felt, like 66%, that the partition of the subcontinent was a bad thing for Hindu-Muslim relations. And that's higher than the share of Hindus as well as the share of Muslims who took that view. So it does seem that, and the two could be tied together, right? And then you also find that Sikhs currently think that communal violence is a very big problem in India. So in part, there's a historical element here with Sikhs, or memory. And we know that Sikhs as a community are quite committed to Sikh education and teaching the history of Sikhism, to their children. We know this from the data. They are the one community that were most likely to say that they send their children to these education classes, to religious education classes, etc. So they're very committed to passing on Sikh identity, Sikh history to their children. So in part, they could be reflecting on, they certainly are reflecting on the history with their answer on the partition question, but that could also influence how they see communal violence more generally now. Jonathan, anything?
I would just add as well that we did simply ask, is it a very big problem? How big of a problem is it in India? And so it does not necessarily mean, it may, for some communities, it may not be that they see it as a very big problem within their community or impacting their community. Perhaps they are looking at other parts of the country and say, oh, in this part of the country, it's just always in the news, it's a big problem. Or perhaps they are reflecting on their own lived experience. So it could be a broad variety of things. We simply asked them to rate how big of a problem they saw this across the whole country.
Is it possible, and again I'm going from a survey design perspective, that bringing out partition as part of the question may have opened up some of the wounds of partition, which are very real in Punjab, in that part of the country, that the mindset changed and they looked at it differently?
You're asking a great question about methodology. We do sometimes find that context, this is what we call the context effect. Context, whatever questions you're asking before can influence a question you ask later. But actually, in this case, it was the other way. We asked people about the problems facing the country much earlier in the study, and the partition question actually came toward the end. And there was a decent amount of gap between the two, which we try to do on purpose, just to prevent what we call the recency effect, right? People would remember very easily what they were asked last. So, it could be that the question about the national problems influenced the question about partition, but it's unlikely. There's a huge gap between the two, and the problems question came so early on in the survey, and as part of a battery, right? There were a number of other questions, like Tushar was pointing out. But Jonathan thinks very, very deeply about methodology, so I'll let him add any observations.
Like Neha said, the question about national problems was one of the very earliest questions. It was maybe the fourth or fifth question they got once we got into the actual meat of the survey. And so it was probably 30 plus minutes later that someone was asked about the partition. So unlikely that it influenced, though of course you are right that it could have had an impact.
Okay, there's one more question
Sorry, go on.
There's one question that came up in the last meeting, and I wanted to get that clarified, is about this religious conversion part. And I think you had a table that showed what people practiced as when they were young versus after they, as an adult at this time, and those percentages did not change. Is my reading correct?
Yeah, let me unpack that one for you, because I think it's worth understanding kind of how we do this. So we measure religious conversion around the world. We've done it extensively in the United States. We've done it in Europe. Every survey that I've done has measured religious conversion. There's a standard kind of sociologically accepted way of doing this, and we follow that methodology. The way it works is you ask people, what is your current religion, if any? And then you give them a list of options. Later in the survey, you ask, and in what religion were you raised as a child? And you list the exact same set of options. If you compare the two, you get the sense of what is the rate of religious switching. In India, we generally find that the share of people who were raised Hindu matches the share of people who are currently Hindu. And that's the same among other religious groups as well. To the extent that there's change, very, very minor, and I'll get to that point in a moment. There is, however, longer-term change in India, in the religious demography of India, but that's largely a result of differential fertility rates, not as a result of religious conversion, and our study kind of adds to that body of evidence. We also can measure how many people were raised Hindu but are now no longer Hindu, and how many people were raised in another religion but are now calling themselves Hindu. And we find that less than 1%, about 0.7%, were raised Hindu but are now no longer Hindu. So they have converted out of Hinduism. And about the same share, 0.8%, were raised in another religion but now call themselves Hindu. So you may ask yourself, how can that be? Hinduism is a non-proselytizing religion. There's no theological basis for conversion into Hinduism. So how is that possible? Well, theology aside, that's what they told us. They said they were raised in some other religion. A small share said they were raised in something ambiguous. They said they didn't know their childhood religion, but now they're calling themselves Hindu. So it's a wash for Hindus, right? Same share leaving, same share entering. Same thing for Muslims. It's a small share who leave Islam, but a small share who come in, so it's a wash. One group in India where we see some net gains from religious conversion are Christians. We find that 0.4% of adults in India were raised Hindu but are now Christian. And of course Christians lose a very small sliver of people, but still it's a net gain for Christians. So, what that means, 0.4% can seem like a lot or can seem very little depending on your perspective. And in absolute terms, it's kind of hard to say. But I can talk in relative terms because we measure religious conversion around the world. Compared with other countries, United States, Europe, elsewhere, Latin America, this is a sliver. It's a very, very small share of religious switching in India. It also tends to be regionally concentrated. So among the 0.4% of former Hindus who are now Christians, the vast majority of them are located in the south of the country. So some are located in the east as well, the vast majority being in the south. Their caste background tends to be Dalit or scheduled tribe. So these are things I think that need to be, that's the context for religious conversion in India. I'm happy to clarify any methodological or other aspects about this.
So this, this part is sort of the 9 states, I think you said in a study, have enacted laws against proselytization. So that would be sort of along that line, even though the number is very smaller compared to what you see the rest of the world. But compared in the Indian context, it is indeed much higher compared to other religions. So small support for that, but not for anything else. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I'll add one more piece of context to what you just said, you're right. I mean, 9 states have laws against proselytism, and we find that religious, to the extent that there is conversion, it's occurring outside of those 9 states in the South. Mm-hmm. But the South also has the highest share of Christians in the country. Okay. So I think we have to keep that in mind as well, which could also, that's also an intervening factor. And as a result of religious conversion, we do see the Christian population of the South increase within the lifetime of the respondent. So 6% raised Christian, 7% currently Christian, just in the South, right?
Tushar, if you have any question, you can ask. Otherwise, you can open up Manjari to have people come and ask questions. We have about 15 minutes or so left. So
I think we can questions from the audience. I think that would be.
So Manjari, your call. You can bring in people.
Hi, Vijit.
Hi, Manjari. Hi, Tushar. And hi, Anna, Jonathan, Neha. A fantastic presentation, and I look forward to reading the study in detail. I'm just curious. I work as a journalist, and so I'm curious about the media coverage of this great study. Usually, media is very interested in anything that seems counterintuitive or surprising, and certainly your study threw up some surprising results, at least surprising to the current narrative about India and religious tolerance. I'm just curious, when you pitched the study, I'm sure that your public relations people sent the study across to dozens, if not hundreds of journalists across the international media. What kind of a response did you get? Because the coverage has been paltry.
All right, let me see if I can answer that question, since I handle outreach and media relations for this study and for the Center's religion research more broadly. What we often see, and this is the same for most of Neha's studies, actually, and I'm calling them Neha studies because she is the associate director for the International Religion Survey team, is that American media are usually more hesitant to cover our international religion surveys, and I think it has a lot to do with sort of the complexity of religious life in other places and how different that is from the United States. And so it would probably have to be more of a feature piece to sort of cover one of our studies looking at religion internationally. We did see, obviously, as you noted, and everybody who follows Indian media, we did see a ton of coverage, and we continue to see a ton of media coverage in India. We did see some stories coming out of Western Europe. We saw some coverage out of Germany, out of the Netherlands. And we had a couple of pieces here in the United States, including in the Wall Street Journal. There was a great column on the study. This is about what we see when we release international studies for religion. I'm trying to remember, and looking back, I think for Eastern Europe and for Western Europe, we studied religion there in 2017 and 2018, and we saw about the same media coverage. It is always, we always get excited when we get U.S. media coverage, but to be honest, the report was also written for primarily an Indian audience, so there's also that to consider.
Well, no, I hear what you're saying, Anna. I find it ironic because you said that usually American media, shies away from this subject because it views religion as an extremely complex topic. But I'm surprised when you say that, because I've seen American media covering religious issues in India with abandon over the past 7 years. So for them to have suddenly developed cold feet when it came to this survey suggests something else might be at work. And I assume that I'll offer my hypothesis, which is that perhaps the main findings, even though there were several findings, I mean, this study seems really rich in all sorts of findings that we were not aware of, and perhaps the main findings, the headliner findings, were not to the liking of some reporters who have been covering these issues. with that, I'll end. Thank you.
Well, it sounds to me like maybe there's an interesting column from you in that hypothesis.
Yes, maybe.
I think I'll just add one thing to it, which I think I agree with you, Dijit, is that when you have a narrative which has been, contradicted by a big study like yours, which I think is a very rich study, it requires that the media cover it and try to correct its own narrative, which was based on anecdotal evidences, and sort of make a clarification that the reality is probably different than what we have been saying. But I'll leave that question to another room, another time. Sunilji, you're next. Please go ahead. Sunilji, you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, and thank you to the authors of the study. It's a very comprehensive study and much needed. I just wanted to make a comment about the religious conversion. One possible reason, and I have, as an activist before coming to America, I did work in the, religious conversion field, basically countering the conversion. Many times those who get converted, especially from the reserved categories, they don't declare it because they lose the benefit of the, government education and jobs. We know that 50%, of the seats in government, education institutions and jobs are reserved for these so-called reserved categories. And if you convert out of Hinduism, then you don't get that. So that could be, and that is, I know, a reason many of them don't declare themselves as Christians. And I know friends in America from South who are practicing Christians, but they don't declare it officially. So they are, on paper, they were still Hindus in India. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Neha or Jonathan? I think the point is that there is an institutional benefit of remaining in a certain category, and moving out of it will take your benefits away. So that may lead to some biases. Was there any correction for that bias as part of the survey?
Yeah, the way that we are asking people is the same way that Indian Census is asking the current religion. So, what is your present religion? Later we ask how are you raised? So I think the hypothesis you're suggesting is there could be people who are currently Christian, but they don't say that they are Christian. They actually say that they are Hindu because in the Indian administrative categories, you can't be a Christian scheduled caste. You can be scheduled caste if you're a Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, but you can't be Christian and qualify as scheduled caste. So, that there is some, that has been in the media from time to time that could be happening. However, we don't have any studies to show the extent of it, the extent to which people are, intentionally saying that they're Hindu when they're Christian. That it's just not, we don't have any empirical data on it to be able to say anything with any confidence about how widespread that is.
So it's a feature we have to live with it. That's what it is. There's not much we can do about it. So, okay, sounds good. Deep, you're next. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Praveenji, for bringing up such interesting topics here with such esteemed panel. So my question is to Jonathan and Neha. So, I, as a person who works with data every day, so my question is, regarding the methodology and, how you conducted the survey. So, India with the, 1.3 billion people, that too 10 years ago, and such a, geographical complexity, cultural complexity, and that too many religion. So with 30,000 sample, so how could you, factor in the sampling here in the data sets?
Jonathan, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can start on this one. So we specifically designed the survey so that we could receive enough responses where we would feel comfortable talking about the views of some of these smaller minority groups. So a sample size of 30,000 Indians, as long as it's statistically sound, you're going to get obviously enough Hindus, and it's very unlikely that you won't have enough Muslims to talk about their attitudes on any number of topics. But you're right, some of these smaller groups, it would be hard. So the way we specifically designed this study was that we, in the sampling stage where we were selecting where we would go, nearly every place except for like some of the islands and places where our interview teams had previously identified were unsafe for them to travel, everyone had a chance of selection, 98% of the Indian population. But what we did when we selected places, because we can't just randomly go and do one interview in one village or one city block, we need to, for cost purposes and for logistics, we do, say, 10 interviews in a village or 10 interviews in an urban neighborhood. So to select those spots, places that had larger shares than other places of minority religious groups had a larger chance of getting selected. That said, places that had many, overwhelmingly Hindu population, they also had a chance of selection. We did do interviews in those places as well, but this increased the pool of people, say, from the Jain or Buddhist community that we were able to interview. Now, of course, at the end of the survey, we don't want to, because we interviewed a little more Jains or Buddhists than we would naturally find, we don't want to say that there are more Jains or Buddhists in the country than there are. So because we know the probability of selection, we increase their chances, and we know by how much we increase their chances, we then decrease the amount that they play in the final weighted data. So we, at the back end of a survey, we weight the data for a few things, and one of them is probability of selection. So if someone had a greater chance of selection because they lived in a place that had more Muslims and Christians and Jains, they have a slightly less of a role in the final data. Something else we do in this weighting stage is we also adjust the population so it matches the census on some very basic demographic factors, such as age or location. We want to make sure that our final study doesn't give more weight to, say, a state in the Northeast than a state in the central part of the country that has many more people. So we weight according to a few things, including the probability of selection. But yes, we did slightly oversample places that have religious minorities so that we could authoritatively talk about these small religious communities that often there aren't enough people in studies to be able to talk about them.
I'll just add one thing to Jonathan's point, and I think Jonathan can correct me if I'm not right, is that the sample of 30,000 is not representing 1.3 billion people. It is representing, I think, close to 800,000 adults, right, Jonathan, if I'm not incorrect?
Correct, yeah. So very good point. Our survey is representative of all adults in India. So yeah, based on the 2011 census, it's a ballpark of 800 million. And we based all of our sampling and our designing based on the adult population. Represent our understanding, of course, that India does have a large under 18 population that can slightly change the demographic makeup of things.
One more thing, Jonathan, if I may add. So when you have selected a particular place with a larger probability of getting a minority population, so there one thing is here, if you studied India, so here if we go to places where there are some sorry, I think I was out of the room somehow. Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
So what I was saying, so if you take a place where there is a probability of getting a minority population is higher, so there they also have their local cultural biases. So a particular group may tend to follow a particular bias, and then somewhere else they may follow something else. So that may tilt the pattern somehow. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, thank you for this. And what happens is we still, though, did find, we do interviews with people wherever they are. So while it is true that people that are in places that have a larger minority religious community may have different views, or they may not, from places that are more predominantly Hindu, perhaps. We also, of course, did find people from minority religious communities in other places. So the views of, say, Jains or Buddhists are not based solely on those that were found in that kind of location. There are also interviews with people from minority groups in predominantly or overwhelmingly Hindu neighborhoods or villages. So it is possible that at the village level that is the case. But yes, we did get interviews with people from all different backgrounds, all different states, different religious makeups.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just one quick question on this, follow-up on that, is that when you do oversampling, the purpose is to get representation from so-called observations that would otherwise not be sampled on a random basis. Is that correct?
Yes, so it is still based in the probability and the statistics and the random sampling, because we are still a place that had 100% Hindus, for example, still has a chance of getting selected. Everyone has a chance. It's all done through some random probability, but we just know the probability of selection. But it is designed to make sure that we get people from all different backgrounds. We also do other things on the sampling side so that we make sure we have a good mix of both urban and rural communities. It's not just urban Indians or just rural Indians. Same things with distribution across states. We want to make sure that we, as much as possible, are representing a wide variety of views in our data so that we can say that it is 98%, 98% of the Indian population had a chance of selection, and we feel confident that it is nationally representative. Yes.
Yeah. I'll let Uday ask the last question because I know you guys are extending your time a little bit. So, and then I will have a follow-up question maybe, but Uday, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and congratulations to Jonathan and Neha for such a comprehensive survey. So I had a similar point of one of my earlier speakers regarding if you are able to capture correct percentage of conversion, because a lot of people might not want to tell their true religion because of the social welfare schemes, and I think you already told you have to follow the census, which I believe, I think if you take true census, the Hindu population is close to 70 rather than 80%. But my question was, did you do any survey with regards to the interfaith marriages where you collected data of how many percentage of people who were in the interfaith marriages had to convert or are still practicing their religion of birth? That's my first question. Second question is, it seems the tolerance level, or at least the concept of religion, God, seems to have heavily influenced by the majority population for the minorities in India compared to the similar religions in the neighboring countries. Do you agree with that assertion?
Yeah, let me answer your first question with regard to interreligious marriage. We asked people about interreligious marriage in a couple different ways. First, we asked the religion of the spouse, and then we asked if the spouse was raised in the same religion or raised in a different religion, trying to capture spousal conversion. Anyway, we looked at it, we found that Indians nearly universally are married to the people of their same religion. Interreligious marriage is a rare occurrence in India. It's like 98% of people are married to the spouse who is of the same religion and then also was raised in the same religion. So to the extent that there is interreligious marriage, it's a low occurrence. Now, with regard to the question about whether the shared beliefs, etc., in India come from the majority community to the minority and not the other way, to some extent that is true. I mean, we do find the Hindu beliefs being commonly held by people in other religious communities. So karma, for example, or the Ganges having the power to purify, or celebrating Eid is another really good one. There is some evidence of the reverse direction. So in the north, for example, this is not going to be a huge surprise for people from the north, but a significant share of Hindus in the north say that they have visited a gurdwara. prayer, for meditation or for prayer, for a religious purpose, not just for tourism. We also find that there are small share of Hindus, I think about 7%, Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, who say that they celebrate Eid. And roughly 20% of Hindus who say they celebrate Christmas. So, even though in the other direction the shares are higher, so for Karma or celebrating Diwali, etc., you see a higher share of minorities engaging in those practices, there is some evidence that it goes the other way as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick question. I'll just take
Can you hold up 1 second?
Yeah, sure.
Neha, can you just give us a little summary of how does these numbers compare with the rest of the world? Because you guys do surveys, all over the world. So how does it compare? The religious tolerance, I would use the word religious respect for the religion is more appropriate here. In India versus, other countries, I would see if you have more data on Asian countries, because that's maybe a more appropriate reference point.
We can draw some limited comparisons. I think the question about religion and national identity, we did ask in Europe, elsewhere. We have not asked that elsewhere in Asia, at least not in the religion surveys. But in Europe, we asked how important is it to be a Christian, to be truly German or French, or etc. And there we find much lower shares, saying that it is very important, to be Christian, to be truly German, or to be truly French. It's about half the share that we see in India across those countries. Some of these Catholic countries in Southern Europe, like Italy, Spain, etc., it's a bit higher, but still much lower than India. In the US, we asked this question a while ago, so we have to be cautious with the comparison. But if I remember correctly, in the US, it was about 50% of Americans saying it's either very important to be Christian, to be truly American, or somewhat important to be Christian, to be truly American. But again, we just need to be a little cautious because these countries also are much more secular than India. So those factors could be playing a role as well. So it's not really directly an apples to apples comparison. You had also asked about neighboring countries. I think one thing we were able to do in this survey that's detailed in the overview is we were able to compare the attitudes of Indian Muslims to those of Pakistani Muslims as well as Bangladeshi Muslims, as we have previously surveyed those populations. And interestingly, we find that Indian Muslims, as far as their religious beliefs are concerned, resemble Indian Hindus much more so than they resemble Pakistani Muslims or Bangladeshi Muslims. So when it comes to, for example, their belief in heaven or evil eye, etc., there are numbers of Indian Muslims who believe in these things is pretty close to Indian Hindus, and which is overall lower than what Pakistani Muslims as well as Bangladeshi Muslims profess.
So I think I would like to get the answer, if you have it, on a comparative basis for religious tolerance, how free they are to practice their religion. In India, the numbers are close to 90%. How are those numbers like in, say, other countries that you have seen around?
Let me look that one. Don't remember off the top of my head, unless Jonathan remembers on religious freedom what we found elsewhere. And I haven't asked in a while either.
Yeah, I don't recall when we specifically have asked and what the numbers are. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we can look it up for you, Dr. Sinha, if we find anything.
Okay, thank you. Tushar, any question you have? Thank you, Neha and Jonathan, for staying a little bit longer. We'll try to wrap up as quickly as possible.
No, I am good. Thank you.
Okay. So, Manjri, do we
May I
have...
take 10 seconds?
Yeah, Deep, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, Jonathan, I have a question for you. So, if I understood your methodology correctly, then I think you have done some sort of stratified random sampling here, for the selection group. So, my question, I may sound too much technical here, but sorry, I can't help it. So, my question is, have you calculated the probability of sampling error here? Can you give me any number? Thank you.
Basically at every stage of selection, there was a probability of selection. We selected within states, we selected districts, and each district had a chance of selection. At the sub-district level, the same, and then again at the lowest level, at the village, there's probably the best source for going to the more depth on the methodology would, I would highly encourage you to look at the very end of the report. There's an 8-page or so summary that talks in some detail about this, also about questionnaire design, and those sorts of things. So I highly encourage you to check that out. There's also a video that we had made with one of our methodologists answering some of these sorts of key questions that hopefully will answer all your questions. And thank you, thank you, Deep, for those questions about methodology. We love answering them. And thank you, Dr. Sinha, and all of you for inviting us. We do have another commitment. We're going to need to hop off here. But thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, Neha, Anna, please, for coming here. Yes, thank you for staying a little bit longer. We'd like to conclude the room right now. So thank you for being here. And if you need to leave, please go ahead. We may hang around for a little bit here if Tushar and Manjri have to add anything to it. So thank you all very much. I thank Pew Center for this excellent work that they have done. And we are really glad that you came here and explained the results to us. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for excellent questions.
Thank you for hosting us. We really enjoyed this, and this doesn't have to be the end of getting answers for your questions. If you have any more questions, feel free to. The easiest way to get them to us is to send them to info@pewresearch.org. Just send an email there, and if you label the subject line with something related to the India study, then the team that monitors that inbox knows to just forward all those questions to me, and then we'll get you answers as we can.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Tushar, do you have any thoughts, or is it time to end the room?
I think we can end the room. Yes, but good discussion. I think there were some great insights on the discussion. Of course, there were more questions I wanted to ask, but the paucity of time. But
Excellent room. Thank you.
Thank you, Yudhijit. That was a good question you asked, and I think a lot of us are wondering ourselves why is this not being covered. But I think you already answered that in some way, and I think we need to do our part to get it spread out as much as possible.
Yeah, I think we should have more rooms, just on this side.
I think the one thing I wanted to discuss was about the way Hindus and Muslims are perceived in popular narrative. This survey addresses a lot of those misconceptions. One of them I had the opportunity to ask, because given 80% of 120 million Muslims is far bigger in potential than 70% of, say, 800 million Muslims. So a lot of those misconceptions, notions that are pegged against Hindus in popular narrative, the survey addresses that at a very mature level. So I think that's one of the reasons the survey should be understood more, read more, covered more. And I recommend everyone a good lengthy reading of the survey, a study rather, not a general casual reading. So that would be of great value.
We will be writing a summary of this survey in the form of a news item. I'm going to work with Manjri on that, and then we'll share it with you all. And if you want to spread it, you're more than welcome to do it. I just want to stick with the facts, and I think the facts are pretty clear in this survey.
Tushar, on a lighter note, I'm having too much mails from you, and they are going directly to the spam. Just kidding, by the way.
Okay. Anything else is here? I think looks like we've already addressed everything.
No, I had one question. I wonder if we could maybe spend a minute discussing it. I found this everyone is free to practice their religion, but they want to basically mingle with their own kind, and they want to be separate and hold on to their identity. I feel like maybe that has been the recipe for the success that India has had, over centuries as a pluralistic society. That you are free to do what you want. I'm free to do what I want, but I'm also free to not associate with you if I so choose, and there's nothing wrong with it. I just find that maybe there's some incredible wisdom that is being reflected in that finding.
Yudhijit, that's a very important point, and I think that's what the Western, the US media do not understand. When we say, I think that Supreme Court case is worth citing, in which the Parsis wanted to live together. So, USA has this notion of melting pot. Everybody has to mix with everybody, and if you don't, you must hate them. And I think that's the history of US, in which slavery and hatred and mistreatment of a minority is deeply embedded, and it's a dark side that they are not able to overcome even to this date. I don't think we have anything like that in India. If you want to be what you want to be, and we'll not stop you. And to some extent, that is what has led to the preservation of these very tiny minorities to prosper and remain vibrant like the way they have been. If they were forced to mix, maybe Parsis might have disappeared totally because the number was so small, but they still are a very active and very vibrant minority. So I think your point is very correct, and I agree with you.
No, I love your comment about it too.
Sunil, do you have something to add?
Yeah, and if I may, it's not just about segregation, inter-religious segregation. It is also within the religion. Different communities, they live within each other, and segregated. Especially true for Hindus, because we say Hindu religion, but it's not one, it's like thousands of traditions. And you see the communities, they live, in their own, especially I grew up in a village, and people live, the Thakurs will live with their community, Lodhs will live with their community. And, they intermingle in daily life, but their living is separate, segregated. So this is very much part of Indian life. And Praveenji, you are right that this is what has led to preservation of, these identities and their own ways of living, while respecting, those who don't follow your way.
Yeah, one important thing is, I forgot who asked the question. Maybe Praveenji or Tushar asked the question. So the question was like, how many people are practicing the religion right now, and what they were, practicing from birth. So there they give the number of, if I remember correctly, it was 98%, I think. So there, even if we trust the survey, then also 2% of 1.3 billion, that's also too high in my mind.
In India, everything is very high. So get a sense of the scale. Numbers don't matter; it's scale, relative proportion that matters in the end. In a country like India, everything is a very large number. So that is something you just can't ignore.
But that means if even 2% is true, then also rampant religious conversion is happening, we can say.
Whichever way you want to look at it, but in a very large country, a small fraction will be a very large number. That is undeniable. So, if you're concerned
I think Dr. Sinha, a good follow-up room might be. So the key with surveying is the precision of language, and when you ask a question, what is that question perceived as by the person who's responding to that? I think that would be an interesting discussion to have, because especially when you think about things like God, one God with multiple manifestations and stuff like that. I had invited Suket up to talk about it because he's very articulate about it. But what if you Devta, Bhagwan, God, all these things mean very precise and different things. And I think the responses to that might change. And you mentioned that with the word segregation and what that means in the West versus how you're looking at it in India, right? So I think that might be an interesting follow-up conversation to this as well.
Neeraj, do you have something to add? You've been very quiet. I know you've been busy recording it, so.
Yeah, Praveen, I just want to make one quick comment on this. And this survey is really good. It is actually bringing up the tolerance, which was discussed in Western media, to the length. On the conversion, I'm little not sure what they were trying to find out because of the social structure. If you look at the social structure and you go and ask anyone, hey, did you convert from, let's say, Islam to Hindu? it does not matter what the fact is. It based on who is asking and to whom you are asking in what situation does matter. Most of the public settings, people are not comfortable saying that, hey, I do convert either way, from Muslim to Hindu or Hindu to Muslim or Christian to Muslim. This is true in Goa also, where it is majority Christians, which we know the meaning. They were native Indians and whatever, right? But there also, they are hesitant to answer that question. So I was actually hoping the institution like Pew will find out alternative way to ask this question rather than asking what was your religion at birth, because that immediately people will sense it is going in one particular direction and may not answer it particular way, and that is the reason why we may see the skew. But I overall agree that though there is conversion and all this may be happening, I don't see it is happening more than 10% kind of, which is shown in the survey, or it is not in two-digit number for sure, looking at the current thing. That is my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, how's the
Doctor, I'll
survey?
take your leave now. I have to be in another meeting at 8, so I'll take your leave.
Okay, thanks, Tushar. I think the questions, the way they are framed and the biases they create are important. And I think, like the way I answered my question, these researchers are highly trained to see how those things can be mitigated. It would have been a good question to ask. I can follow it up if you want to ask that, but I'm not sure that they will let a blatant bias go like that. But you have a valid point. So, Suket, you could not come in earlier. We wanted you to come in, but I think your question was a valid one. My only thing is to that question is how many percentage of Hindus really understand that distinction? And if they don't, then the question survey is pretty valid. If vast majority do understand and the question is misleading, then there is a concern.
Again, it was, thank you, Dr. Manjari, nice to meet you. See, it goes other ways as well. How many of the people who were asked this question understand that what's the difference between Bhagwan, Ishwar and Devta? And should also, the reverse should also be applicable when they are saying that it's just one. How many of them know that at the end of the day it is just one? So, I mean, when you say God, and I don't know, usually I'm more articulate than this, but I hope you understand what I'm actually trying to say.
You are a lot more knowledgeable about religion than I am, Suket, so I definitely know what you're saying, but to some extent I don't understand the nuances either, so I won't pretend to know that I can answer your part. So, yeah, I think there are, surveys always have issues. I mean, there's no survey which is perfect, but I felt that it was done so cautiously and in so much depth that somewhere along the line, if we don't trust it, then we don't trust anything in the survey. And I think I do trust a good amount of the results in the survey, based on my intuition, based on the way they conducted it. Yeah, some things may come out in the sampling errors. There's no question about it. So,
see, Dr. I can now, sorry, I'm getting back. I got my chain of thought. What I was actually saying was that I think more important than people understanding what the difference between Ishwar, Bhagwan, and Devta is, it's important for the people asking the questions. So that was my other way around. Like, the person who's asking the question, do they know the distinction between these things? And then a question can be posed in a certain way. And that's how you get rid of the biases. That's how you show, and again, if their study will throw up a contradictory result when it comes to religion, it'll be because of these lack of understanding of these nuances by the researcher himself. So that's the point that I wanted to make.
Yeah, I wish we could have asked that question, but somehow we missed it. I can send it out to them because I'm in touch with Anna at this time. So, yeah, if you don't mind sending me and dropping me a line, I'll definitely get a clarification on that. So,
yeah, Praveerji, one more point. Here the questionnaire that they prepared, that itself may have some biases because, if we talk about India, there, if we move around, let's say 50 kilometer or 100 kilometer, language changes, culture changes, and then if we translate from English.
Let me jump in on that. They have
Yes,
a
sure.
questionnaire available on the website. They also have translations of the questionnaire available for you to see.
That is
very,
fine. So,
very robust, and it's a very robust methodology and a very robust questionnaire. The stratified sampling plan is fantastic. So
I get your point, Manjari. Just let me finish my point.
Let me ask one question, Deep. Have you read it?
No, I just read report on it. I didn't read the original report.
Yeah, read the methodology section. I think you have some very good questions. I must say.
Sure, I will. So my
you're a
point
technical
is,
person. So
I'm a technical person. That's why I may sound like too much technical here. So sorry for that. But my point was, let's say the questionnaire was in English. So if we move around 100 kilometer or 50 kilometers, so language changes, culture changes, and then if we translate that questionnaire word by word to a language of local language to whom we are asking the questions, then we cannot get the uniformity of the questionnaire. Like maybe someone from Jammu and Kashmir.
Let me stop you here. Read the report. They went to linguistic experts, local experts. I think, as Manjari pointed out, this is very. I did not ask this question. I was tempted to. How much did it cost? It must be a very expensive study, the way they've done it. So read the methodology section. They went to the local linguistic experts to make sure that the translations were correct and in a way that people can understand. Of course, there'll be some mistakes that will be made here and there, but we call them random errors and they will always happen. But to say there is a systematic bias and they forgot and totally ignored it, I think without studying methodology, you should not accuse them. I would suggest that's.
No, I'm not accusing them. Actually, we all review papers. So doubting things, it's just our way of putting things there. So it's not like
but deep doubting things without having read the study is not very academic either.
Yeah, of course. I'm just these are my doubts here. So I'm just clarifying my doubts. It's not like I'm doubting their studies.
So I'd like to, Dr. Saab, I'd like to. I'd just like to ask one more thing. What Deep is saying, I know where he's coming from. Usually these studies happen with leading questions and all of those, and all of these things, biases are not checked. So he's extrapolating it from there. But Deep, since Manjari and Dr. Sinha already mentioned before you finished your question, and you insisted on finishing the question, but they'd already answered it a couple of times, that's when you should have stopped. So that is where this was going. That is what was mentioned to you. That you insisted on finishing what you wanted to say, but they'd already understood. Doctor, another thing, when you were asking, and since this would have been very, very expensive, they were saying this was non-profit, they don't work for an agency, they don't work for anybody else. But since it would have been a very expensive thing to do, who got this survey done? Is that information available?
I think Manjari can tell you there is a local, very well-known company in India which did the survey for them. But as she mentioned, you may not have been here. They will make the whole data available to public for analysis.
No, as in not who conducted it, as in who funded it. Why did somebody want this data?
The John Templeton Foundation, I think, gave a grant to the John Templeton Foundation. It's a very respected foundation. And so while the Pew is funded by the Pew Charitable Trusts, which gets donations from all over, this particular study, I think, got some assistance from which I know has funded many such studies in the past, and is quite respected.
Thank you, Yudhiji. And it's a fantastic study. I mean, it goes without saying.
I wanted to make a tongue-in-cheek remark, Dr. Sinha, about what kinds of press releases about this study could perhaps have gotten it wide coverage, whether true or not. For example, if somebody came up with a press release saying, Reliance secretly funded Pew study on India or something, do you think that would be widely covered? Or things along those lines? Because I'm still pretty gobsmacked at the fact that the first real solid study of a subject that everyone has been talking about for the last 8 years. 30,000 people surveyed, using the best available methodology, with complete transparency. I mean, how could it just not have sparked the interest of hordes of journalists who've been covering this topic? I'm still just amazed, and I feel like we should continue to do rooms on this study. And as part of those rooms, we should draw attention to the fact that this was widely ignored.
Well, another headline could have been that Hindus found to be massively communal towards the minorities, and by the survey, and then this would have been picked up by, well, FII, which all organizations we're talking about. It could have been the best survey they would have actually covered.
Actually, it is not true, right? I think there was an article saying that BJP IT cell hacked the Pew server to change the outcome of this.
But on a serious note, though, Dr. Sinha, perhaps we can think about some follow-up conversations, because I think most people need to understand what is in the survey, because it busts the general narrative out there, something that we speak up against and we're struggling to fight. I think this really busts that narrative, and I think it'd be good if more people understood what was in the survey and were able to talk about it from a place of knowledge and information.
I mean, you're right, Manjari. I'll just say one thing. What people have done, and I think that's the saddest part of it, they'll take one question from the survey, like Indians want to live separately, segregate, without putting any context to it, and then try to make it a very big deal that India is a very, very, there's discrimination in India. All kind of unnecessary derivations from one question, and try to spread it as far as they can. And I think that's why it's important, and I felt that you failed to put a perspective on segregation part of the study. I think I read the whole report. There was no mention of anything about Supreme Court cases that ruled that segregation is okay. In US, it's illegal. So you need to, instead of applying the US value to India, saying that Indians have segregation, put the context that in India they feel it is okay, and they have ruled that it's okay. So I think that's why these rooms are important. I agree. And Yudhijit, I do not know what to say, but I think your case is better than mine. There's a saying which I've said multiple times in a room. It is easy to fool a person. It is very difficult to convince him that he has been fooled. And I would say that for most of the media companies in the US, they have been singing the same song for such a long time that they will not believe the survey, even though they know it's true.
So, Pravinji, if I may add, I was very frustrated with, my friends in HSS that why Indian embassy is not fighting this narrative. So then I got a reliable information. The previous Indian ambassador to America, Shringla, when the CAA happened, he wrote an article. So you remember Imran Khan had written an op-ed. I think it was in New York Times or Washington Post. Pakistani Prime Minister. An Indian ambassador gave a rebuttal. Now, this newspaper sat on the rebuttal for 15 days. They did not publish it. And the day published it, next day there was a rebuttal to the rebuttal. So they were arranging in the back that the moment they publish Indian ambassador's rebuttal, there will be a rebuttal to it. So that is the level of bias the media has. And partly it is coming, there are multiple reasons, including colonial bias. So we have to just educate our community, our activists, and spread it. We shouldn't expect much from the media because they are, they have their own committed ideology.
So I think we are pretty much done now. If somebody wants to continue the room after this, they're more than welcome to do it. But I think we're pretty much done. At this time, we have spent 1.5 hours. Uday, anything you have to say? And Suket, anything you have to say? Or Manjari? Or Neeraj?
I just wanted to add one thing to what just said, that it's not colonial mindset. It is a deliberate scuttling of information. It's a strategy, and it's a very well-planned strategy. So, I mean, something.
I think, Dr. Sinha, we can close the room now.
Okay.
Maybe have a follow-up conversation later.
Just let me have Peter say the last word if he has anything to say.
Yes. Yeah,
We're good. I think we can.
Do you have anything to say? You're the last person left now.
We are good, Dr. Sinha.
Okay. All right. So thank you all for coming. We will probably do some more rooms. Please give the feedback to mods, whichever one you are comfortable with. And if there's need, we'll definitely do some more rooms. So thank you very much all for coming. Enjoyed having you all here. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Sinha. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful initiative.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Please provide your feedback at ia.irvine.oc@gmail.com. Also, please like the page and follow us on Facebook using the link provided below in the description. Thank you.